It was supposed to be an ordinary day. The kind of day where nothing remarkable happens, where the hours drift by in a haze of routine. I woke up closer to noon, still groggy, while most of my family had already gathered in the living room, laughing and chatting with my visiting brother and his family. It felt good to have them around, filling the house with warmth and noise. I made my way to the kitchen, craving something simple, an egg or two for a late breakfast. As I opened the fridge, the cold air brushed against my face, jolting me awake. I reached for a couple of eggs, one in each hand, when something strange happened. It was quick, so fast that I almost doubted I'd seen it at all. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of a shadow moving across the kitchen wall. It was long, thin, and eerily straight, without any features resembling a human figure. The shadow glided from one wall to the other, as if it were a phantom on a determined path. I froze, one egg slipping from my hand and cracking onto the floor. I turned my head slowly, my heart pounding, but the shadow was gone. The kitchen was empty, just as it had been moments before. For a second, I tried to convince myself that I had imagined it. Maybe it was just a trick of the light, a momentary hallucination brought on by my half-awake state. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, a lingering sense of dread crept up my spine. There was no logical explanation for the shadow's origin. The kitchen was enclosed, and the window and balcony were shut. No one else had entered the room. And yet, that shadow had been there, clear as day. I shook off the feeling, trying to convince myself it was nothing, just a momentary glitch in my perception. But as I would soon learn, that shadow was only the beginning. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the memory of the shadow. It hovered in the back of my mind, nagging at me like a puzzle I couldn't solve. I wanted to tell someone, my family, maybe my brother, who always had a knack for solving mysteries, but something held me back. I didn't want them to think I was losing my mind over a simple shadow. As the days passed, I began avoiding the kitchen. I'd find reasons to go out or eat in other rooms, anything to avoid standing in that quiet, enclosed space where the shadow had appeared. I tried to bury the memory, telling myself it was just a trick of the light, a fleeting moment of confusion. But the shadow wouldn't let me forget. One evening, after dinner, I was alone in the kitchen again, washing the dishes while the rest of the family relaxed in the living room. I had almost forgotten about the incident, focusing on the clinking of plates and the warm, soapy water in my hands, when it happened again. A chill passed through the room, prickling my skin. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, the shadow. It was the same long, thin line, gliding from one side of the kitchen to the other, but this time it seemed more purposeful, almost as if it were aware of my presence. I dropped the plate I was holding, and it shattered against the floor. The shadow vanished, leaving me alone with my own racing heartbeat and the sound of my family's laughter in the other room. I felt trapped, unable to look away from the wall where the shadow had disappeared. I could no longer pretend it was a hallucination. Something was in that kitchen, something I couldn't explain, something that seemed to be watching me. After the second sighting, I couldn't keep it to myself any longer. I told my brother about the shadow, half expecting him to laugh or shrug it off. But he didn't. Instead, he listened quietly, his face thoughtful, his eyes darkening as I recounted every detail. When I finished, he took a deep breath and said, "There's something I never told you about this house." My stomach twisted as he began to explain. He told me that our grandparents had lived in this house before us, and though they'd never spoken of it openly, they'd had their own experiences with the supernatural. Small things like strange sounds at night, flickering lights, and objects moving on their own. Our mother had dismissed it as mere superstition, but my brother had always been curious. He'd asked our grandmother once, pressing her to reveal what she knew. And she had told him something that made his blood run cold. Our grandmother claimed that the house had once belonged to a man who had mysteriously vanished. His disappearance was never solved, and after a while, people simply forgot about him. But some say his spirit still lingered, bound to the place where he had lived his final days. Our grandmother had always believed that his restless spirit haunted the house, trapped by unfinished business. "Do you think that shadow is him?" I whispered, the realization sending a shiver down my spine. My brother shrugged, but his eyes betrayed his own unease. "I don't know. But if it's him, maybe he's trying to tell us something." The thought haunted me for the rest of the night. If this shadow was truly a spirit, then what did it want? And why was it showing itself to me? The sightings of the shadow grew more frequent, almost as if it were gaining strength. Every time I entered the kitchen, I felt its presence, lurking just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to make itself known. The air in the room felt colder, heavier, as if the shadow were slowly seeping into every corner, tainting the atmosphere. One night, as I lay in bed, I had a vivid, disturbing dream. I was standing in the kitchen, the house around me dark and silent. The shadow appeared on the wall, stretching across the room like a long, twisted line. But this time, it didn't disappear. It stayed there, moving slowly, beckoning me to follow. In the dream, I felt myself drawn toward it, as if in a trance. The shadow led me through the kitchen, down the hallway, and toward the basement door, a door that we rarely opened, a place we never went. The basement was dark and damp, filled with old boxes and forgotten furniture, a place where time seemed to stand still. As I descended the stairs in the dream, the shadow slithered down the wall, guiding me deeper into the darkness. I could hear faint whispers echoing through the air, growing louder, until they were a deafening chorus of voices pleading, "Help me, find me." I woke up drenched in sweat, the words echoing in my mind. I knew what I had to do. The shadow was leading me somewhere, urging me to uncover something hidden. But I couldn't face it alone. The next morning, I told my brother about the dream. Together, we decided to go down to the basement and find out what the shadow wanted us to see. Armed with flashlights and a sense of dread, my brother and I descended into the basement. The air grew colder as we went deeper, and the shadows seemed to thicken, pressing in from all sides. Every creak and groan of the old house echoed through the basement, setting my nerves on edge. We searched the dusty boxes and broken furniture, finding nothing but forgotten relics of the past. But then, in the far corner of the room, something caught my eye, a small, loose floorboard, barely visible in the dim light. I knelt down, prying it up, and found a small compartment hidden beneath. Inside was a faded, water-damaged notebook. The pages were brittle, the writing barely legible, but one phrase stood out, written over and over again in shaky, desperate handwriting. "They buried me in the walls. They buried me in the walls." A chill ran down my spine as I realized what it meant. The man who had vanished, the previous owner, hadn't disappeared. He had been murdered, his body hidden somewhere within the walls of the house, his spirit trapped, unable to rest. The shadow wasn't just a ghost. It was a message, a plea for help from a soul condemned to wander forever in the place where he had died. My brother and I took the notebook to the authorities, and after weeks of investigation, they found what we had feared: human remains, sealed within the walls of the kitchen. The police confirmed the identity. It was indeed the man who had disappeared decades ago, his body hidden away, his death a mystery that had gone unsolved. After they removed his remains, the house felt different. The air was lighter, the shadows less oppressive. The kitchen, once a place of fear, became a normal room again, bathed in sunlight. But I can't forget what happened, the moments when I saw that shadow sliding across the wall, trying to reach me. He had needed someone to see him, to understand his story, and in the end, I had answered his call. I haven't seen the shadow since, but sometimes, when I'm alone in the house, I feel a faint presence, like a gentle breeze passing by. And I like to think it's him, finally at peace, no longer bound to the shadows of our kitchen. We thought that discovering the body in the wall would end the haunting. We believed that the spirit, finally acknowledged and given a proper burial, would move on, leaving us in peace. But as the days passed, something strange happened. The feeling of dread that had once filled the kitchen began to spread throughout the entire house. The atmosphere became heavier, the shadows darker, especially in the basement where we had found the notebook. It was as if by unearthing the body, We had disturbed something far worse, something that had been lying dormant. My brother and I both began experiencing unsettling dreams. The shadow was gone, but in its place, I kept seeing something darker, an oppressive darkness that seemed to swallow everything around it. I would wake up drenched in sweat, with the feeling that something was watching me, waiting just out of sight. One night, I heard my brother call out from his room, his voice thick with terror. I rushed in, finding him pale and trembling. He told me he had seen a figure standing at the foot of his bed, a tall, featureless shape cloaked in darkness. He tried to scream, but no sound escaped his lips. When he finally managed to move, the figure vanished, leaving only a cold, empty silence in the room. It was as if the spirit we had released had been replaced by something even darker. We had freed one soul, but in doing so, we had somehow invited another into our lives, a new presence, ancient and malicious. Desperate for answers, we went back to the historian who had first told us about the building's dark past. When we explained what had happened since the discovery, his expression grew grave. He listened intently, his fingers tracing the edge of his notebook as if he were reluctant to speak. "There's something I didn't mention before," he said finally, his voice low. "In cases where a spirit is bound by violence or trauma, there's often another force present, a guardian of sorts, a darkness that keeps the spirit trapped. When you release the spirit of the murdered man, you may have accidentally awakened this guardian." My brother and I exchanged uneasy glances. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means that whatever force kept that spirit trapped in your house is still there," he replied. "And now it's angry. It no longer has a soul to feed on, so it may turn its attention to the living." The historian handed us a small, worn talisman, etched with symbols I didn't recognize. "This is a protective charm. Keep it with you, and make sure it never leaves the house. It may buy you some time." We left his office feeling more terrified than ever. We had thought we were helping, but it seemed we had only made things worse. And now, whatever this guardian was, it was awake, and it was watching us. We kept the talisman close, placing it on a small table in the hallway, believing that it would keep the darkness at bay. At first, it seemed to work. The oppressive feeling in the house faded slightly, and for a few days, we even managed to sleep without nightmares. I dared to hope that the worst was over. But one night, as we were getting ready for bed, we heard a loud crash. Rushing to the hallway, we found the talisman shattered on the floor, broken into pieces. A sense of dread washed over us. It was as if the house itself was rejecting the charm, as if it had taken offense at our feeble attempt to protect ourselves. From that moment, the haunting escalated. Doors began slamming shut on their own, and the temperature in the house dropped, even as summer approached. Shadows moved in the corners of my vision, slipping away just as I turned to look. The house felt alive, pulsing with a dark energy that seemed to be growing stronger. And then the dreams returned, more vivid and terrifying than ever. This time, I didn't see the shadow or the figure at the foot of my bed. Instead, I dreamed of the basement, the same basement where we'd found the notebook. In the dream, I was standing at the top of the stairs, staring down into the darkness, feeling an overwhelming urge to descend. I would wake up in a cold sweat, my heart racing, a voice whispering in my ear, "Come to me." Each night, the voice grew louder, more insistent. The darkness was calling me, and I didn't know how much longer I could resist. One night, I couldn't fight it anymore. The pull was too strong, the voice too persuasive. I found myself getting out of bed, my movements slow and dreamlike, as if I were under a spell. I drifted down the hallway, my feet moving of their own accord, carrying me to the basement door. As I opened the door, a gust of cold air rushed out, chilling me to the bone. I took a deep breath and descended, each step feeling heavier than the last. The basement was darker than usual, the shadows thick and impenetrable, as if they were alive, writhing in anticipation. When I reached the bottom, the door slammed shut behind me, leaving me trapped in the darkness. My flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows across the walls. I could feel something in the room with me, watching, waiting. And then I saw it, a pair of red eyes, gleaming from the darkness, piercing me with a malevolent gaze. The creature stepped forward, its form shifting, as if it were made of smoke and shadows. It was tall, towering over me, and its face was a blur, shifting between human and something else entirely. It reached out, its fingers long and bony, and I felt a wave of cold wash over me. The voice echoed in my mind, a guttural whisper filled with rage. "You released him. Now you will stay in his place." Panic surged through me as I realized what it wanted: to trap me here, to take the place of the spirit we had freed. I stumbled backward, desperate to escape, but the creature lunged, its fingers brushing my skin. The touch burned, freezing me in place. Just as I thought it was over, I heard my brother's voice calling my name from above. The sound broke the creature's hold, and I bolted up the stairs, slamming the door behind me. But as I looked back, I could still see its red eyes glaring at me through the darkness. After that night, my brother and I knew we couldn't stay in the house. The darkness was growing stronger, and the Guardian would stop at nothing to claim another soul. We packed what little we could and left, finding refuge with friends, anywhere but that cursed place. But leaving wasn't enough. The dreams continued, the voice calling to me, promising that I would never escape. I knew that as long as the Guardian was bound to that place, it would continue to haunt us, trying to drag us back. Desperate, we returned to the Historian, begging him to help us find a way to end the curse once and for all. He was reluctant, but finally agreed to perform an ancient ritual, a rite meant to sever the Guardian's connection to the house and release it from its hold on our family. The ritual took place at midnight, on the night of the new moon. We gathered outside the house, chanting words I didn't understand, watching as the Historian placed charms and candles around the perimeter. The air grew heavy, thick with tension, as if the darkness were resisting, fighting to stay. And then, just as the final words of the ritual were spoken, a deafening scream erupted from the house. The windows shattered, and a dark mist spilled out, swirling in the air before dissipating into nothingness. The silence that followed was profound, as if the entire house were holding its breath. The Historian turned to us, his face pale. "It's over," he whispered. "The Guardian is gone." With a mixture of relief and fear, we watched the house, waiting for any sign of movement, any indication that the curse still lingered. But the darkness was gone, and the oppressive weight had lifted. The house looked different, no longer haunted, but empty, a hollow shell. We moved on with our lives, leaving the cursed house and its shadows behind. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear the echo of that voice, whispering my name from somewhere far away. And I wonder if the Guardian truly left, or if it's simply waiting, watching, biding its time.